Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Sarah E. Brown, Director of Content Marketing at BuildingConnected, founder of Flatirons Tech, and now author of Power to the Startup People. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Hall, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, great. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to the place you are today?
Sure. Like many of us in the startup world, I took a circuitous route. I did not study entrepreneurship in school. I have a liberal arts background. I grew up wanting to be a journalist. I did sort of early media jobs and then realized that what I actually love most about journalism was telling stories. And of course, you can tell stories, I think, and really make a big impact in the startup world as we're teaching our customers in the market about the value we offer. So I pivoted into startups. I had a couple of early experiences in my career that really whet my appetite for it and have been doing it for over a decade. And I still find it thrilling to bring the sort of storytelling aspect to everything we're doing as a SaaS company.
Well, great. Well, let's dive right into the book you came out with. It's fascinated me when I heard the summary and the title. I thought that's really key for a lot of our investors and CEOs who are out raising funding and starting their new businesses. They tend to talk about themselves and the funding aspect of it, but actually hiring people, building the product, and it is somehow treated like a detail that comes later, when in fact it's not the detail that comes later. It's the thing that either works or doesn't work that makes for the future success of the business. And so I see how you talked about the tech world belongs to the startup people, and just wanted to talk more about how you came to write the Power to the Startup People.
Sure. Great question. And I think this will let me talk a little bit more about my background. I see them as inextricably linked to how I got to this book and how I got to where I am in marketing. I, like many of us, felt frustrated by the lack of resources out there for startup employees. I've been a startup employee in-house, and I've also for about 5 years ran my own marketing consulting firm where I only worked with B2B SaaS companies focused on customer success, which was quite a niche. So during my time running my business and then eventually joining another company, after 3 of my clients were acquired in 2015, I had a couple of offers to join. I ended up joining one of the companies and was with them for almost 4 years, a company called Service Rocket. Long story short, as I've been progressing on my journey, both as a founder of my own company that serviced startups and as an in-house startup employee, I really felt that lack of support, resources. I couldn't find any books that were written. So really, this book was born out of my own desire to learn the answers to my own burning career questions. And I think we often, as we're going through our startup journeys, we often seek mentorship. We talk to bosses, managers, people whom we admire, and often we get answers on a one-to-one basis. But there are some pretty predictable things that happen even within all of the ambiguity and uncertainty of the startup world. And so it was such a thrill to get to have an excuse to ask VCs, CEOs, founders, and I'd say high-level contributors at startups questions that I really wanted to know the answers to, and have been really gratified to see that those answers that have come out in the book have really been helping other people.
So how does one know if they are a fit for the startup world? What lens do you put on that?
Sure. A fit. Well, I'd say there's a lot of variation in terms of what a startup is. A startup is both a 10-person or, even a 5-person company operating out of a garage. And now we use that term to describe a company up until it becomes a scale up, and eventually we see it as an enterprise. The experience of being at a 10-person startup versus a 200-person startup is so different. And that's just one of the things that can change your experience. So I would say you're not necessarily the right fit for every stage of startup. If you read Jeff Buskang's book, which I quote heavily in mine, and he's been really helpful. He's a VC with Flybridge. It was very helpful in researching and writing my book. He talks a lot about the sort of stages where your early stage dirt road, everything's chaos, and then you sort of get more structure and process as the company matures. So I would say in terms of who's going to be a good fit, it really depends on the maturity of the company. It depends on the product market fit for the particular segment that they're in. And if you're interested in, let's say, health tech, and you join a 10-person health tech company because you're so passionate about it, that's going to help you get through a lot of the ambiguity and things that might be frustrating. There's quite a lot of messiness. I talk in the book, I interview Sue Habronner, who's part of Merge Lane, which is it's an accelerator that helps companies grow. I think now it's a funderator. I think that's what they're calling it. But, Sue says when you're in a startup, you have to clean out the fridge. It's not sexy. And I think we have to get beyond this idea that startup life is really glamorous. I think a lot of people join startups because they think, oh, this could be fun. And they're not quite understanding those differences at the different stages. So if you really like that structure and process, maybe you come from a bigger company, I would say think carefully about whether you're willing to give up some of that process and predictable experience in favor of a mission that you're truly passionate about and a market you really want to serve. And maybe you'll be happier in the startup world when you work for a company that's a bit larger and has more process, or maybe you're really willing to, as we mentioned, go into the unknown on the dirt road.
I often deal with people coming from large corporations who are enamored with the startup world, as you mentioned, and it all appears to be fun and no tight schedules or budget limitations. But the truth is the exact opposite. Is even more resource limited than the large company, and it's even more work to do, more hours to put in. And so it sounds like understanding the mission and being passionate about the mission of the startup is what really drives someone from a cushy large company into the world of startup land, which can be fraught with a lot of challenges and limitations that come with it. So do you have any examples where you see that actually working?
Sure. Transitioning from a big company to a startup is possible. And I would say for anyone who's interested in making that transition, we talk a lot in the book about ways that you can do it more successfully. I think there are some mindset shifts that you'll have to take on in terms of growth learning. As you mentioned, everyone wears different hats, especially at the beginning. And I think that some willingness to be in that chaos is important because we're disrupting markets and we're doing work as we're building a company where you're not going to necessarily have that 401k right away. You're not going to have some of the predictable career pathing. In larger corporations, you know what it takes to go from an L3 to an L4 at Google. You don't necessarily have that in the startup world. So if you're interested in adjusting, I would say reframing your own expectations about what the environment will be like, and also realizing that you do bring a lot of skills that may be very valuable to a startup, and not to forget the value that you do bring. And I think a lot of people who, let's say, have functional area expertise in finance and they come to a startup and are able to really contribute quite a lot of value, or if you're an operations person and you're the one responsible for helping create some of those processes, that can contribute extraordinary value. So I'd say don't undersell your own ability to contribute.
If we shift ourselves and we put ourselves in the place of the person leaving the large company and they're now looking at a startup, what should they look for when they join a startup to know that that's a good fit for them?
Yeah, I mean, whether you've worked at a large company or you're pivoting from another industry, whether you are a lawyer or potentially you are doing something different, I think the most important thing is to figure out what you value. And there's so much variation in terms of the types of problems that startups are solving. And we interviewed venture capitalist Brad Feld for the book. And I really like his position on this, which is his advice to people in his portfolio companies, contributors interested in joining, is really figure out what's going to get you excited, because startups are hard and the business is hard. And as you mentioned, it's not coconut water and nap pods every day. It's often quite an up and down roller coaster. And it's like that for founders, but it's also like that for the contributors. So figuring out, what are the problems I want to solve? Do I want to help someone's meal get delivered 5 minutes faster? Is that problem going to make me excited? There's nothing wrong with solving that problem. I want to put that out there. For me personally, that's not what gets me out of bed every day to do work. I'm currently in industry. I work for a company called BuildingConnected in the pre-construction space, and we're helping subcontractors and contractors do their jobs better, more efficiently, get time back to be with their families, and actually meeting people who are doing that work and feeling the benefits of using a software and as a service for the first time, and taking all of these processes that have been on whiteboards and Excel spreadsheets, putting them in the cloud is really gratifying. But that's not true for everyone. Figure out what you're excited to work on. And also figure out what your personal values are. I mean, whether those are things like, I want to work for a company where inclusivity is championed, where everyone can show up and be their best selves at work and not feel like they have to fit a certain mold, especially if you're coming from a larger company where maybe you have to have a work persona and then a home persona. I think startups, you don't really get the freedom to be two different people. And that's a good thing for a lot of people. You finally get to be who you are at work. It can be a bad thing for some people who really want that separation. So again, it's really individually checking in with yourself and saying, what do I care about? And there are startups that will have that. You just have to find them.
Well, there's an old saying, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. What do you negotiate up front when you join a startup, and how much leverage do you really have?
When joining a company, the advice that we outline in the book, we've spoken to some experts like HR leader Josh Ashton, who helped a company called SendGrid as leader of HR for a while now. SendGrid's part of Twilio. They just got acquired. But Josh was there through them, I believe, going public. And his advice is to really figure out your risk tolerance in terms of comp. So obviously there are things like the package that works for you in terms of the breakdown of the whole package. And then there's also things like title. And in startups, you may not necessarily get the cash that you're looking for in terms of what the company is able to provide. You can get the upside in the equity. Obviously, you're going to have a lot less equity than a founder, but you still, depending on your risk tolerance, you can negotiate for a piece of the success. Also knowing that potentially you won't get anything if the company doesn't succeed, and the majority of startups don't succeed. So you have to keep that in mind. You can also negotiate for things like what location you're in. There's many startups now that have remote options and you can work from anywhere in the world, or potentially you could work remotely 1 day per week. I think you have to figure out, is work-life integration or balance important to you? In that case, that's something you can negotiate for now that maybe you couldn't negotiate for as easily at a larger company. So I'd say think about lifestyle, think about title, think about your overall risk tolerance in your package. And I would also say, the most, like you said, the most negotiating freedom you have is really before you join the company. So do your research and talk to people. It's worth hiring someone who has a background in startup equity if you can find a lawyer or you have a friend or mentor in the industry, and doing that research on websites. We list a few in the book. It can really help you up front because it's a lot harder down the line. It's not to say that you can't negotiate for things down the line, but coming in is when you have the most leverage.
So once you join a startup, how do you find your place within that startup? Because the lines aren't drawn as tightly as they are in maybe larger companies. You're wearing multiple hats and there's lots of competing priorities anyway, but how do you settle into the right place?
That's a fantastic question. I think the framework of jobs to be done is a great way to look at our careers and think, something's on fire over here, or we have so much opportunity over here. You know what? It's not technically in my job title, but I'm going to go figure it out, and I'm going to go figure out how I can provide value and solve this problem. And if you take the mindset of what are the actual tasks to be accomplished or jobs to be done or outcomes that need to be achieved that you feel that you could bring a skill set to, that will unlock incredible doors for you in your career. I know it's helped me personally. I talked about that in the book. It's my experience overtaking our Voice of the Customer program. We hadn't had one built out previously, and there was just a need. And so looking at the need and choosing to fill it, even though it wasn't technically part of my role, ended up expanding my role and led to a promotion. I think that's just typically what happens at startups. So if you're willing to see a need and not care what the title is associated with who should be doing it, that can be really powerful.
So when is the best time to join a startup?
Well, wouldn't it be nice if we could absolutely have a formula and say, I know this company is going to become a unicorn, so I'm going to join it exactly this time. The truth is it's hard to know. And even the market gets it wrong. And there's been companies, you've seen their filings and you're, oh my gosh, I can't believe how little revenue they're making. And I don't think you can really game the system is what I'm trying to say. I don't think there's a sort of, oh, they're at this many people and they've raised this much money or they're going to do this. I know it's the right time to join. Again, it goes back to you and what you're excited about. And I really like this idea of choosing the right company that's the right fit for you. We talked to Round Peg founder, Dr. Natalie Baumgartner, and she says, you really have to look for that fit because there's only so much you can change and only so much a company can change. So if a company wants to be 50 people and doesn't want to get acquired, and you have a sense of that goal when you have those conversations with the team up front, and we talk in the book about how to have those conversations, that might be right for you. If you really want to get on the sort of rocket ship and are willing to take on some risk tolerance in order to work for a company you think could become the next big thing, I mean, go for it. But I think it's important to know that learning is the most important thing to optimize for, because wouldn't it be nice if we could have a crystal ball and be able to see those outcomes? But I think we're all on the same page that that's not how it works. So focus on joining a company that's at the stage that you're excited about, and you might have to leave. I mean, that's kind of the next piece of it is if you're at a company and let's say they get acquired or there's some sort of exit, and suddenly your 50-person startup becomes a part of a 10,000-person big tech company, and your office in San Francisco is suddenly now answering to an office in Des Moines and you're taking business trips there. I mean, that might not work for you. Or an acquisition could be the best thing that's ever happened to your career. And we talked to Annalise Brown, who is the head of HR at a company called Ship Compliant. that got acquired by a company called Sovos. And she offers a lot of advice in the book for people who are going through an acquisition. We don't really talk about what happens to employees, right? I mean, you're an investor. You talk a lot to founders, I'm sure, about how to approach this topic from their side. Is that right?
Absolutely. I had a manager once tell me the best time to leave a startup is when you wake up in the morning and realize, oh no, I have to go to work today. And it means the fun is gone and it's probably time to be looking for something else. So it'd be great if that was right after the IPO, but that's not always the case either. So it really comes back to your attitude about the job, I think, than anything else.
Yeah, Netflix is a great example. I've heard people talk about the culture at Netflix and how when it was people sitting around the parking lot, having lunch with the founding team, that was exciting. And then when it got to Netflix is now becoming a global corporation and it's a very different environment. And if that's not what you're excited about, of course, it's about knowing yourself and having the self-awareness that, okay, now it's time to leave because I'm looking around and this job isn't exciting to me anymore. I also think sometimes startups will pivot. And so you'll be serving a target market and then that will change. And I see a lot of people leaving companies at that point as well, when they're not as excited about the target market that they're serving.
And how much can you climb up through current startups? Can you level up during your time at a startup? And if so, or do you have to leave to go to another startup in order to get to the next level up?
Yeah, I include an entire chapter in my book about this. I think it's such an important topic and we don't talk about it enough. Startups do not have these predictable rungs that larger companies have. They just don't. Within that, though, there's gradation in terms of some startups start to build in career pathing. They start to build in leveling. But even before any of that, you have to take ownership of your own career and journey. And with my team, I'm often having this conversation. Where do you want to grow? And how can we align that with the company's needs? Because it's very easy at a startup. Everyone comes in over here, over there, figuring out jobs to be done. But at the end of the day, you have to figure out if I want to move into, let's say, a product manager role, and I've been a project manager. I think startups offer a great opportunity to learn those new skills and pivot into new areas. And I don't think you'll often find those opportunities at larger companies. So if you really do want to be let's say a product manager and you've never done it before, startups can give you a great opportunity to try it out. And if you want to level up in terms of switching roles, that's a great option. If you want to, let's say, become you start out as a content manager and you want to grow to become a vice president of marketing or a CMO, there's courses you can take, things outside of your work to supplement it. But I think you also have to really own your journey, and with your CEO, most likely, or your direct manager, you can have those conversations. I want to be completely honest, I do see what happens at startups is people do reach a ceiling. And especially when you get funding from investors, there's this idea of let's bring in adult supervision in quotes. And we're going to bring in a CMO who's done this 10 times at a larger company and to get them to scale the company to the next phase. So sometimes more junior people, if they're not prepared for it, it can be kind of a big blow. Oh, I was running everything. I was doing the website and the emails. And now suddenly there's this boss I have or multiple people who are layered above me. And I think if you're willing to grow and adopt a growth mindset, you can then take that and grow within that. But sometimes that is a time when people do leave and say, I liked the way it was before. I'm going to join a smaller company and maybe get a higher title. So it really depends on the situation. But we do talk in the book quite a bit about stay, leave, or go, and some of the options that you have for how to negotiate at your current company and get what you want.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about startups and how they work?
I think you've pointed out, it's not all coconut water and nap pods. That's sort of my take is it's really hard. And I think another misconception people have from shows like Silicon Valley really is that it's a bro culture. Yes, we have an issue with tech is still homogenous and that startups are still predominated by a homogenous group, but we're seeing more and more underrepresented folks in startups. So I think actually a really positive misconception is that there's a certain type of person who should be at a startup. And I really believe, and this is an underpinning for the book, that if you want to work at a startup, you belong there, and that there's ways that you can find to contribute to the ecosystem. So no matter who you are, you deserve to be there if you want to be there. And there are startups that will value inclusivity, diversity, and you being who you are at them.
And what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes people make when they work at a startup?
I think staying too long in the wrong role and being frustrated. I see people hanging on a lot. I think there's this concept of loyalty. And I think you have to be loyal to yourself and your own career in addition to a company. And this is also, I think the flip side is true where people leave too soon. So this topic of how long to stay, there's a reason why we gave it a whole chapter. In the Valley, especially, I work in Silicon Valley, there's just every day being hit up on LinkedIn. It feels like, hey, we have this new role, there's this shiny thing out there. And now more than ever, especially for roles that are being sought after, there's a talent shortage for, we do have the option to switch very frequently. And there's something to be said for sticking it out and being willing to grapple with negotiating for what you want, for overcoming challenges and hard problems. I think if you never learn how to get what you want from your manager, or how to figure out how to get what you need within a large scaling startup, resource constrained startup, you can go somewhere else and maybe avoid some of those problems. But I think they follow you around your whole career. And you can be very distracted by things like perks. We talk about that in the book, and how to look at benefits versus perks. So I think there is something to be said for not just job hopping every year. And that if that's what's right for you, I'm not going to tell anyone they can't. But for me, it's been very powerful to learn how to ask for what I want, learn how to negotiate for what I need, and to figure out how to be successful within a very challenging set of circumstances that maybe if I left right away, I could solve that one problem, but then another one would come up. It's a muscle that I think you learn. And at the same token, knowing that it's okay to leave. And after a few years or after a certain amount of time, it's definitely fine to choose to move on and do something different. We're not the founders, but we do care. And I think a lot of us take that caring, and maybe they see that the ship isn't going in the right direction and they feel like you don't want to abandon the cause. So I think that's a constant balance.
It seems like some jobs have a certain cycle to them, and if you're doing a meaningful piece of work, it'd be tough to do in just a year. Typically, they're 2-3 years, maybe 4 or 5, and when you get to completing the cycle on that is a good opportunity to think about moving to the next project once you've finished the cycle on the first one, as opposed to getting it halfway done and then jumping ship. It just seems like there's a little bit of, I'm missing something. I didn't actually accomplish what I came to do. But I guess for some people, it's the object is shining enough, it's worth moving on to the next one. But it seems the tech world today is dominated by Google, Facebook, and the Amazons of the industry, and that the workers seem to have very little power. And I think when we look back, we'll look at these companies as the robber barons of the 21st century. We gave them our time, data, attention for free, and they sold it back to us very, very high prices. And what do you think is going to change that?
This question means a lot to me. I think about it often, and I think many of us are grappling with these questions now as we're dealing with concerns over our data, our privacy, and companies like the Big Four that are really overtaking a lot of our lives and yet are really benefiting. Many of us are really benefiting from. And so as we grapple with these questions, I think it's really important to remember that these companies, yes, they have legendary founders, and they also have huge teams behind them. And nothing gets done at these companies without the teams and the contributors. And if we look at the number one founder skill, according to Techstars, which is an accelerator, I actually mentor at Techstars. It's fantastic. It's based in Colorado, but they have Techstars all over the world now. And Techstars is hiring is the number one founder skill and the most important thing that a startup can do. So hiring the team. And so I think if we really look at our ability to shape the tech industry and choose to only work for startups that are aligned with our values and that are building the future that we believe will make the world a better place, I think that's where the power comes from. And also to remember that we don't have to watch, as we're speaking right now, recording this in early November, there's a walkout at Google. And this is women at Google who are walking out against some issues around misconduct. And they're taking a stand. It's not just women, it's people across Google who want Google to be a more just organization. And this happens. I'm excited to see this happening because I think we're going to see even more of that, both at smaller startups and at larger tech companies that began as startups and now are scale-ups. So as companies, I think also are growing and they're smaller, and we have to remember Google was once a very small company, right? A very small startup. And as we're building these companies of the future, we really need to keep our values at the forefront and remember how much as an ecosystem how much power the contributors have to shape the industry.
Well, at the beginning of the industrial age, they formed unions to create collective bargaining power. Do you think they'll create unions again? And if so, what do you think they might look like?
Oh my gosh. I don't have the answer to that question. I'd be curious to see what we do as an industry, but I I do think there is a need for us. I mean, there's so little that's standardized now. And with the gig economy and looking at what does it mean to do work and how can we protect workers, especially in the United States, it's where we lack a lot of the protections other companies have. And having worked now, I worked for a tech company, a startup that had offices in Sydney, Australia, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and Santiago, Chile. And I've worked in all of those offices, and getting to see the differences that the local culture had on how the office environment played out was very interesting. Looking at, for instance, parental leave in the Sydney office, I do believe that having an international presence at that startup impacted how we approach parental leave in the United States. So even though legally, and time off, even though legally we didn't have to, we provided, I'd say, very generous policies around parental leave, or very sane policies. I won't just say generous, I'll say sane. And I do think that's influenced by looking at other cultures and countries. So I don't know what's going to happen in terms of our government and what protections we'll have, but I do see a need for us as an industry to start having more of these conversations. And I'm thrilled that my book has provided an opportunity for us to have some of those. And I'd love for that to continue. And yeah, I'm excited to have more like these.
Great. Well, you start to see some regulatory changes like the European GDPR, where they're starting to put controls or give the user back their information and control over that information. And going forward, I don't think people could just ask for all your information for free. People now know it's worth something. And so there's technology changes with blockchain and other tools coming up. And then there's regulatory changes like GDPR. What do you think will have the most impact in the next 10 years? The technology changes where I can actually do micropayments to get paid for my blog? Or do you think it's really going to be regulatory where they start to push back on these big companies for owning all this data? It seems like we're living in a world of 20th century regulation and a 21st century economy. And of course, there's a big mismatch there.
That's a great point. I mean, Marguerite Vestager in Europe, I think, is really holding a lot of these tech companies' feet to the fire. And she's brilliant and apparently knits on trains. I mean, she's just a remarkable human. She just has this ability to bring companies like Apple to really, she's the one who I would say is really enforcing this in Europe. And in the United States, I think, gosh, I really feel that as our globe changes, and I really believe as we're reconciling some of these really big issues around data and privacy, on the consumer side, we have the ability to say, I don't want to use a product that misuses my data and my privacy is important to me. And then really, I have to bring it back to the purpose of my book, which is igniting our startup contributors to say, I won't build products and services that discriminate. Or we talk about machine learning and ML fairness and creating products and services that are aligned with the reality of our globe. And we have so much work to do in terms of creating products and services that don't just solve Silicon Valley problems. We have a lot of industries that are still not benefiting from technology, and there are a lot of solutions out there that I would argue are not technology solutions. They're government solutions. So I think we're seeing more. In the Obama era, we had 18Z and other organizations. We had Megan Smith, who was one of our CTOs of the United States, and she really pushed for changing the economy. Now she's doing work helping coal miners in Kentucky learn how to code. And there's just so much that technology could do to benefit our world, and so many people who are excluded still. So again, the more people we can bring into the startup ecosystem, we talk in the book about how to get into a boot camp if you want to learn how to code. And that's a great entry point for a lot of people who are interested. I also don't think you need to be a coder to start your startup career. And I think we can get even more people into the startup ecosystem if they don't feel like they have to have a computer science background in order to do it. Not to say there's anything wrong with learning how to code. That's a great option. But if you don't want to learn how to code, there's a lot of other non-technical roles that are important. So I don't know what the answers are. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the more that we can include people in this journey and help create products and services that are reflective of the real world we live in, we're all going to benefit.
Well, great. Well, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Great. Well, it's been so much fun talking to you, Hall. I have a sense that we could probably keep talking all day. I really am enjoying this conversation. My website, sarahbrownmarketing.com. I'm also Seb Marketing on Twitter. That's SEB Marketing. And would love to continue the conversation on Twitter with anyone interested.
Well, that's great. Well, that's Sarah Brown with Power to the Startup People. Thank you for taking time to share this with us today, and hope to have you back for a follow-up as this story continues to unfold in front of us.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.